Welcome to the 12th episode of Kabbalistic Mystic, the podcast for the Western seeker, where we explore the tree of life and the ancient Hebrew wisdom as the lost spiritual heritage of the West. I'm your host, Batat. In episode 2, we've discussed the spiritual principles of the tree of life. One of those principles was free will and what is called the law of confusion. The fact that in this life much is concealed from us in order to allow us to have free will. Here's a follow-up question to episode 2 from Isabella, a listener from Australia. Isabella asks, I don't understand why free will requires faith. If I'm making a decision, I like to make it by weighing up the facts, but it appears that this concept is that God, the divine, our higher self, is deliberately withholding the facts and saying, just trust me. But why would I trust anyone like that? Great question. But this was not the only question about faith I received this week. Diane, a listener from Washington, asked me the following. Why is it easier for some to believe while others struggle to maintain their faith? And how can one cultivate more faith in the ways of the universe or the Creator? So this week's episode is inspired by these questions. What is faith? When do we know something to be truth? And when is it actually true? Why is faith required for our free will to be complete? What is the role of religion? What can we do to cultivate more faith in our lives? And for some of us, how can we overcome various negative religious connotations related to faith? That's a lot of deep questions, so let's begin. Today, we're accompanied by Jean Paul Sartre, a French philosopher who was one of the leaders of existentialism. Well, we're not really accompanied by Jean himself, he's dead, but by his wisdom. And since we're dealing with faith, I thought it would be appropriate to weave quotes by someone who was an outspoken atheist. And not because I want to contradict him, you see, but because truth is subjective. And in fact, I want to show you that he was right in practically everything he said, despite the fact that he did not believe in a higher power. So we'll get to Jean soon enough. You'll recognize him easily by the sound of my dear wife's voice, who kindly agreed to narrate him for the purpose of this episode. And for now, here's a simple question. Does the moon have gravity of its own? So I'm yet to meet an informed adult who would answer no to this question. And yet I've yet to meet someone who was actually on the moon. We all believe that the moon has gravity and that it is about half of the Earth's gravity. We believe it because scientists have told us that and because we saw Neil Armstrong hopping effortlessly on the surface of the moon. And we also believe that Jupiter is the biggest planet in our solar system. It's a collective truth we hold as species. And yet none of us has visited the gas giant. Well, I guess except for Juno, NASA's $1.1 billion probe who traveled for 5 years and entered orbit around Jupiter just this week. Congratulations, NASA. Here's Jean Paul.
To believe is to know you believe. And to know you believe is not to believe.
A thinker, that one. But he's alluding to the fact that there's a thin line between facts and what we deduce to be true, and therefore believe to be true. We know that if we jump off a roof, we'll fall down without even doing it. We deduce it because we know experientially that gravity exists. And yet someone, somewhere, believed that it was possible to defy it. So he looked at birds and studied their wings, he calculated numbers and designed an aircraft. And someone, somewhere, was willing to put their lives on the line and actually test it, resulting in our ability to travel via air. They had faith in something unknown and operated with this conviction. Faith is a choice we make to believe in something that is yet to be experienced by us as a fact. Faith contradicts proof. Once something is proven beyond doubt, you can no longer have faith in it. It just is. We no longer have faith that the earth revolves around the sun. We know it does. So we see that there's obviously a close connection between what can be logically measured, deduced, and concluded, and what we call faith. The more logical something is, the closer it is to our experiential memory, the easier it is to believe. And so we all believe, as a species, for example, that Mars has no atmosphere, even though none of us has been there. So let's talk about free will for a moment. Free will can only exist when we do not know something to be a fact. We cannot choose to believe in the laws of nature. They just are. Similarly, if there was a proof that God existed, we wouldn't have a choice but to believe in it. In fact, we wouldn't believe in it. It would just be. It would be a fact of existence, just like gravity. And so if God does exist, life was obviously designed for us not to be able to prove it. And the question is, why? Or as Isabel articulated in her question, why would God deliberately withhold information requiring us to believe in it? Since we're talking about what is true and what is not, and to be philosophically accurate, I have to first answer this by saying, I have no idea. Nobody does. I have an opinion, I have a belief, which I will share in a moment, and would hopefully satisfy the curiosity behind the question, but I don't actually know. I don't even know if there is a God. I believe that there is one. I have an inner knowing of sort, but I do not know it as an intellectual fact. If someone tells you that they know that God exists, they're lying to themselves. In this reality, the only known truth that is exposed to us is the various reflections of the laws of nature. Everything else is just information that we choose to believe over the unknown. It's a choice we make. Our reality is subjective. When we're dreaming, we believe it to be true, and then we wake up, and suddenly it's not. For all we know, we could all wake up the next morning, the next moment, to discover that this life was nothing but a dream. And so I can't tell you what is true. I can only tell you what I believe to be true and why, basing it on whatever reading, studying, and information that I've gathered, and ask you, the listener, to practice the art of resonance. If it resonates with you, you're free to include it in your current set of beliefs. If it doesn't, it wasn't meant for you. And so it goes. Imagine that we're playing hide and seek, and I come to you and say, hey, close your eyes, and I'll be hiding right over there behind that car. I've practically ruined the game. I've deprived you from its very essence, you not knowing where I am. The same can be said about life and the uncertainty of God's existence. The entire purpose of our journey is to find the Creator. We're actually told where to look by those who have already found it. And it is in the most unlikely place of all. The place is so obscure that it requires us to take a leap of faith to even start searching. And that place is within. You see, the very question, why should I trust someone like that is hiding its existence from me, that requires me to believe in it, suggests that God is separate from you, that it is an external entity. This is a result of generational conditioning we've all been exposed to, that God is a separate entity from us. In reality, you are God. There is no difference between you and God, other than in the scope of what your current conscious mind is able to perceive in this moment in time. This illusion of what you're experiencing as a moment of time in itself was created just for the purpose of you perceiving life, because in reality, time does not even exist. It is stretched to be sensed as a continuum so that you can act and participate in this life.
Existentialism is not atheist in the sense that it would exhaust itself in demonstrations of the non-existence of God. It declares rather that even if God existed, that would make no difference from its point of view. Not that we believe God does exist, but we think that the real problem is not that of his existence. What man needs is to find himself again and to understand that nothing can save him from himself, not even a valid proof of the existence of God.
In reality, we are not searching for God. We're searching for ourselves. The topic of God becomes almost irrelevant. The journey is the same whether God exists or not. It is the journey to find our true nature. If God exists, you'll find it when you find yourself. It will become your subjective truth. For you are God, and God is you. God is your true nature. We are God, all of us. The concept itself is nothing short of blasphemy, according to most religions. You see, the term God is heavily loaded. We can't even speak about it without being exposed to the vast energetic weight that has been infused in it through thousands of years. Many of us, myself included, have been indoctrinated that God is vengeful and strict, that he, quote unquote, as God is generally attributed with masculine qualities by the patriarchal religious establishment, he requires us to follow his commands and stay clear of sin, a misunderstood term that is greatly misused, and I'm heavily tempted to dedicate the next episode to.
The painful secret of gods and kings is that men are free, Aegisthus. You know it, and they do not.
But we're learning. Beware, kings. But in the meanwhile, due to the past conditioning, we associate the concept of faith with God and with following orders, with complying with rules. I still cringe sometimes when I hear the word God. I still cringe to hear myself talking about the concept of God on this podcast. It's almost embarrassing to me after all these years that I've denied the existence of God and associated it with religion, with organized religion. If God exists, what happens in our minds, for those of us who do not believe it, then we're nothing but sinners. If it exists, our entire lives might be subject to change. We will have to be slaves. It's a really heavy load to carry, to digest. Furthermore, if God exists, then the comfort of knowing what to do, leaning on facts and on our logic, evaporates into thin air. We're immediately and inherently sucked into a reality in which we cannot trust our own mind. We're positioned as an unawakened being, less than, since after all, we're not really feeling very divine on a day-to-day basis with our earthly needs and chemically complex bodily vessels. And talk about the mind, our ability to grasp the true nature of reality is very limited, since we can only sense this physical world with our limited senses. Instead, we're trapped in an endless chatter of a mind that just wants to run away from itself. What does this say about us? And furthermore, what mechanism of existence must we comply with if indeed other dimensions exist, dimensions which are subject to a dynamic structure and operating mechanism no less complex than our own, but extremely different? Can other beings read our thoughts? Do spirits really exist? How do we pray? What is prayer? What about ghosts? Are we paying for karma we accumulated in past lives? And what kind of karma have we accumulated in this one? The thought of God's existence is daunting. This is why many of us fall into the comforting lines of religious dogma. It helps us know what to do. Believing in God can be exhausting. It's like a Pandora box has been opened. It's overwhelming. Everything we believe in, or didn't, to be accurate, is suddenly shattered. Enters science. It gives us a way out, just like religion. Everything is logical, and the only thing we do not know is what we haven't discovered yet. Someone who is smarter than us will surely figure it out, and we can all believe it as a collective, all in due time. Someone We'll figure it out. And so both religion and science give us this comfort beyond what is unknown. What a relief.
Dostoevsky once wrote, "If God did not exist, everything would be permitted." And that, for existentialism, is the starting point. Everything is indeed permitted if God does not exist, and man is in consequence forlorn. For he cannot find anything to depend upon, either within or outside himself. He discovers forthwith that he is without excuse.
In truth, in our haste to bury religion, we've created a beast far more dangerous, to which we salute while turning a blind eye away from our true spiritual nature. You see, when I was an atheist, I was very vocal about it. I used to say to people that I rather claim I don't know how the world was created rather than lean on an imaginary story of a God in the sky. I was very judgmental of those who believed in the existence of God, just as I'm sure that others are judgmental of myself at this point. I couldn't understand how people who I respected, people who were smart and logical, allowed themselves to believe in something so elusive and unscientific. And I was not shy expressing my opinion about it. So here's the deal. I'm a logic head. I need things to make sense to me. I used to say to my wife that everything is logical. She knew not to argue with me because I could always come up with a logical argument to defeat hers. Not because logic prevails, but because it is blind. Logic refuses to assume anything outside of its comfort zone. Try to explain to a fish what it feels like to sit by a campfire. It'll keep telling you, what's this imaginary fire thing? How can it exist if the entire universe is submerged in water? The dangers of intellectualism stem from confinement, not from the freedom to think. Today, I know my wife was right. She was the smarter one. There are two sides to reality, one that our conscious mind can understand and one that it can perceive and sense, feel, but not rationalize. Not everything is logical.
She believed in nothing. Only her skepticism kept her from being an atheist.
Jean Paul Sartre said this about his grandma. I can identify with her being the atheist that I was, so let me share a bit of my own journey. When it comes to faith, you might say I was logicked into believing. I was seeking at the time, but did not know exactly what. It was shortly after I quit my hated daily job and a series of events beyond my control, including a dramatically serendipitous dream and a series of anxiety attacks, led me to believe that there is more to life than what we see. And so I asked, I seeked. Seek and you shall find, not consciously, but subconsciously. And that's all is needed. Shortly after that, a friend recommended I read the raw material. Something rung true to me and I read it. The raw material is a series of channeling recorded in the early 1980s, which I introduced in episode 10 of this podcast series. Now, the raw material, which I digested simultaneously with a few other important texts by various modern-day explorers of human consciousness, has changed my life. It presented an extremely compelling logical story about the nature of existence. It painted a common thread across all spiritual methodologies, scientific theories, hypothesis around the true nature of existence, and gave a point of view about the illusory nature of our reality that was so holistic, so logical, and so well-rounded that I was literally logicked into believing in the existence of a higher force, of a creator, that we're all one. It suddenly made more sense to me. It was more logical that a creator existed than one did not. Leave it to a logic head to logic his faith too. But doing that through the raw material is not easy. It's very cryptic. It takes a very long time to learn. And I had my own experiences that allowed me to kind of pull through and get to the other side. But in reality, it was really not just the logic of it all. It was more than that. The material touched something deep in me, something I knew and forgotten. But still, my faith was based on logic, on thought. It made sense to me. And it was months and years later that I went through what I can only describe as a gradual spiritual awakening, various physical, tangible, sensed, and mostly illogical events during which I have actually experienced the Creator within and awakened to the true nature of reality. And I'm not going to go into them, not because they are personal. Nothing is really, at least to me. And I believe, if I believe that they would be of service, I would gladly share them. But the reason I'm not going to go into them is because they are completely irrelevant. And here's why. YouTube is full of testimonials of people who have underwent spiritual experiences, near-death experiences, people who were in a coma and came back, you name it, it's all there. If they were helpful in convincing people to believe, atheism wouldn't be the fastest growing belief system in modern history. At the end of the day, we cannot be convinced as to the existence of a creator. We must experience it ourselves. It's the same as love. We hear about it in the movies, we dream about it, and we know we seek it. There's something that rings true to us, something that we know but forgotten. But it is only when we truly fall in love that we understand what all the fuss is about.
For those who want to change life, to reinvent love, God is nothing but a hindrance.
Have you found God and interested in spreading His or her love? Love well yourself. That's all. Sharing your deep spiritual experiences with those who did not experience their own, or worse, spreading dogma about one should or should not do, will most likely cause one of the two things. So they'll hear your deep spiritual experience and they'll either doubt you and think you are hallucinating, because it doesn't matter how real you'll explain the experience was, the logical mind will always find a way to debunk what is misunderstood. Or they will actually believe you, which is even worse, because most likely than not, it will cause them envy and will cause you to feel pride. After all, why did you experience it and they didn't? Imagine what they feel. What makes you so special? And in truth, why do you need to share it anyway? In most cases, when people share their spiritual experience with others, it's either because they want others to believe too and follow the same path that they are on, or due to spiritual pride. They're both pointless endeavors. And I've sinned, if I risk myself by using this loaded term, in doing both.
That God does not exist, I cannot deny. That my whole being cries out for God, I cannot forget.
At the end of the day, all that matters is what we know within. As long as we're alive, we don't know what is true and what is not. It is what we do, how we act, and what we feel that counts. Regardless of what is within, we know we seek it. Let's keep searching. Something will show up, and then we know. And even then, the knowing is internal. It is I which knows. To the rest of the world, I just believe. Religion is dead. It just doesn't know it yet. Our future is shaped by the views, behavior, and consciousness of our future generations. Those who are taught to think freely are no longer bound by the tethers that constricted past generations. They intuitively know what is right and naturally understand what is wrong. Thy shall nots are no longer needed and in fact harmful to the liberated mind. And so organized religion, Great Run, which lasted about 3,000 years, is already on its deathbed. In 3 to 4 generations at the most, which are nothing in the greater span of human history, it will become merely a reflection in our collective human history, one that has defined us as a species for better or worse. Spirituality, on the other hand, will prevail. We are spiritual beings. Our vessel is nothing but flesh and bones. Our soul does not reside in our limbs, tissues, head, or even hearts. Ask a person who went through a heart transplant. He or she will tell you that. Our soul resides in a plane which cannot be accessed, quantified, or computed with the most sophisticated lab equipment. How can a scientist measure a mother's love to her child? How can he quantify someone's fear of the unknown? We are all different, living in a subjective reality that can only be truly evaluated by our own unique circumstances. Suffering is subjective. The emotional anguish of a rich man is just as raw as the torment of the poor. Circumstances divide us. Emotions unite us. Our grief, anger, and fear are universal, and so is unconditional love. That is the only objective truth. Everything else is a synthesis of man-made assumption and the subjective experience of those who made them. In our suffering, we cling for control, desperately trying to ensure others will adhere to our perception of reality. We all do it. For generations, the few have controlled the will of the many, citing their rules as the only mean to avoid chaos and social collapse. That is the very definition of religion. It is not, however, the definition of spirituality, which embraces chaos. In reality, there is intelligence in the chaos of the universe. That is a truth we know deep down in our hearts. We need not to eliminate it, but to learn to appreciate it. The chaos hides the thread that continuously weaves our story as a species. We must learn to trust it, not to fight it, like a powerful current in the river of life itself. We have to flow with it. Whoever, whatever created this universe had a grand design in mind. It is okay to try and understand it as long as we're capable to accept that we'll never be able to do that fully. Every new generation is more intuitive, more emotionally tuned, and more conscious than all the previous generations combined. If you are a parent, you know that to be true. The expansion of human consciousness has entered an exponential trajectory. Consider this. It was only 120 years ago when a theory around the subconscious mind was first introduced to our public awareness by a young analyst named Freud. On the grand scale of human existence, our mind is just waking up. We're nothing but infants, learning for the first time in human history that who we thought we were, our ego personality, is nothing but a figure of our imagination, constructed by labels, beliefs, and circumstances to which we're exposed since we took our first breath. It is presumptuous of us and extremely arrogant to assume we have completed the process. We have merely begun to understand how to deconstruct the ego personality. We are the only species on the planet which has the ability to psychoanalyze itself. That is, expand its own consciousness by self-study. It is not only our privilege, but our individual responsibility as human. It is the essence of our psycho-spiritual journey. It is the essence of our own evolution. personally, individually, and as a collective. Science has failed to provide us with the answers to life's most burning questions: who we are, why we're here, and what is our purpose. We are consumed with desire to find out if we're alone in the universe when we have failed to genuinely understand our own inner true nature. Ancient wisdoms answer these questions. Stripped from dogma, they tell us what we all want to know. They tell us that we do not need our physical eyes to see. We see in our dreams just fine, even with our eyes closed shut. The truth is within. There is more to life that can be sensed by our physical vessels. It is time for science to recognize that it is deficient. In its desperate attempt to escape the confining shackles of religious dogma, it has formed into yet another system of beliefs that cripples our progress as peoples. We must accept that the intellect cannot prevail without the intuition, that logic cannot exist without a hint of faith, as well as the acceptance of the unknown. All great discoveries in human history were originated by the power of faith. Those who discovered them believed in a reality unproven, in what considered by others to be a delusion. There is a thread which connects and unites us, all spiritual systems and all spiritual beings. Where there's smoke, there is fire. These spiritual systems, these spiritual methodologies have survived the test of time for a reason. Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, mysticism, occultism, alchemy, science. They are all fruits of the same seed of universal truth, morphed through time into small steps and often into stumbling blocks on our road to inner liberation. We must strip them of their own ego personality and find their uniting thread. It contains secret that we desire to discover and answers we desperately seek as people. Believe nothing. Study everything. Accept no religion and practice pieces of them all. Adopt only what rings true to you. The hardest battle you'll ever fight will be against your own prejudiced mind in an effort to dissolve half-truth that you've been fed and have coagulated into mental barricades on your own path to liberation. Make love your guiding star, your destination, your weapon, your truth, and the path on which you walk. All else is irrelevant or will come in due time.
Up there in heaven, God gets all the attention. We can only love on this earth and against God.
So we spoke about faith and believing and about religion, but all that is in our heads. What about our hearts? How can we cultivate more faith? How can we experience our true nature, experience it physically, emotionally, tangibly, feel the divine with our hearts? Again, the more accurate answer, or really the only accurate answer, is I don't know. I could tell you what worked for me, but that would be irrelevant again, since everyone's journey is different. My most intimate experience of God within was shortly after I was genuinely afraid for my life. How could I recommend someone to desire the same? I couldn't, nor do I wish anyone to go through the same suffering or experience. But I do have a few tips to share, which I believe would serve as signposts as to the current individualized path you must take on your own road inward. When I was a kid, I stood in synagogue on Yom Kippur, a holy day in which you're not supposed to eat, and I emptied a sugar pack into my mouth and said, God, if you exist, kill me now. I obviously lived, and therefore to me, God did not exist. Unfortunately, and fortunately to me, it does not work this way. Intention is everything. If your purpose is confirmation instead of information, you will receive nothing. There are no confirmations. Remember, proof contradicts faith. Intention is key. And so what I recommend is that you ask to experience God or whatever higher force you think is inside of you. If you're not comfortable asking for God, don't. Instead, ask to find your true nature. What do you seek? Who are you asking? Maybe you're asking yourself, if that's more comfortable to you. Ask the universe, whatever higher force that you think is listening within. Maybe your higher self. It doesn't have to be anthropomorphized into something tangible or logical. Just ask for it and you shall receive. Not immediately, at least for most of us. It's not like you say, oh, I want to experience God. Please appear before me, and right there you're going to hear a voice. But you will at some point. Write it in your journal. Putting it in writing is very powerful. Put it in a small note and carry it in your pocket. Make a little ritual out of it. The more intention you put into it, the more powerful it would be. Remember, the subconscious, which is your connection to the divine, does not hear or understand logic. It understands emotion. Call for it, cry for it, desire it, long for it, and it shall come. A great advice that has served me well was given to me and to others by Ra. It recommended to ask to find love in every moment. So remember, our true nature is love, unconditional love. And so to ask to find love in every moment is like saying, I want to find God, to find whatever the Creator, to discover your own true nature. That request, this prayer, whatever you want to call it, encompasses everything in it. To find love in every moment, you'll have to change. You'll have to dissolve your ego, because your ego is the only thing that prevents you from experiencing love in every moment. And so this is a powerful request. Say, I seek love in every moment. Say it out loud. Write it down. I still say it every now and then. It has served me well. Ask, then pay attention. This is why I greet you at the end of each Kabbalistic Mystic episode. May you find love in every moment. Another tip. Remember that no discovery of our true nature is possible without changing ourselves. You are a diamond in the rough, but like everyone else, you are covered with grit and dirt and corrosion. Buffing yourself is required so that you can see your beauty. That is done with the tools of transformation we have at our disposal. Intention is the first step. Everything else follows. I will be covering many tools of transformation in this podcast. Some, such as dreaming and the body, I've already covered in episodes 7 and 9, respectively. And other tools will follow shortly. Commit to changing yourself and ask yourself in what ways you can do it, in what ways do you want to change. Starts with the places you get snagged, triggered, angry, upset, sad, scared. These are great starting points. All these places where you feel those painful emotions are places that your diamond is not showing and the light cannot shine through. Ask why. It is impossible for someone to change themselves without the intention of experiencing their spiritual nature and not finding it. Simply impossible. We are built for this process. It is our nature. Seek and you shall find. Lastly, but most importantly, do not beat yourself up for not having faith or for doubting or for not experiencing the divine. You are human, living behind a thick veil of fog or forgetfulness that was designed to hide the truth from you. What you are experiencing is necessary for you to evolve at this moment. Many lessons can only be learned in darkness. Faith comes when it is appropriate. It is natural. It makes sense to feel frustrated, resentful, for having this unconditional love, this truth, which we seek to be taken away from you. That is okay. To know the light, you must know your shadow first. Accept what is, and always remember,
in love, one and one are one.
Thank you for listening to the 12th episode of Kabbalistic Mystic. I would like to thank Isabella and Diane, who asked these important questions and inspired me to do this episode. I also want to thank Jean Paul Sartre for amusing us today with his wisdom. If you think others can benefit from this information, please share Kabbalistic Mystic with others and or review it on iTunes. Reviews are very important for podcasters and will help me sustain the show. Go to kabbalisticmystic.com/review or click podcast in the top menu, then review on iTunes from the top menu for simple instructions. I also want to remind you that you too can submit questions to be answered via the show on the website or on the Facebook page. Today we heard music by Bramji. I'm your host, Ovadia Batat from Spokane, Washington, wishing you love in every moment.